The silence in Martha Henderson's small apartment was so thick she could almost taste it, bitter, like the lukewarm tea sitting untouched on her scratched kitchen table. 80 years old today. 8 decades of life, and here she sat, paralyzed from the waist down, watching the afternoon sunlight paint golden rectangles across her worn linoleum floor. She'd stopped crying an hour ago. There were no tears left, just a hollow ache that settled deep in her chest where hope used to live. Outside her window, the world moved on without her. Children laughed in the apartment complex courtyard. Cars hummed past on the street. Life continued its relentless march forward, while Martha remained frozen, both literally and figuratively, in this tiny one-bedroom prison that Medicaid barely helped her afford. Her wheelchair sat beside her recliner like a silent companion, the only constant presence in her days. She'd imagined her 80th birthday differently once, back when her legs still worked, back when her husband Robert was alive, back when her daughter still called. The last time Sarah had visited was 14 months ago. Martha kept count. Sarah had stood in this very living room, her designer purse clutched tight against her side, her eyes darting around the cramped space as if poverty might be contagious. "I'm sorry, Mom, but Greg and I are dealing with our own problems right now. The kids have activities, his business is struggling, and I can't keep coming down here every time you need something." Martha had watched her only child walk out that door, had listened to her high heels click down the hallway, had heard the final devastating sound of the elevator doors closing. That was the last conversation they'd had. Now Martha reached for the remote control, her arthritic fingers trembling slightly. The physical therapist had told her to keep her hands moving, to maintain what independence she could. But what was the point? Independence for what? To change channels between game shows and soap operas? To wheel herself to the bathroom? To heat up another frozen meal that tasted like cardboard? The knock on her door came so unexpectedly that Martha actually jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Nobody knocked on her door. The home health aide had already been by this morning, efficiently helping her bathe and dress before rushing off to her next client. Meals on Wheels wouldn't come until tomorrow. She wasn't expecting anyone because nobody ever came. "Hello?" a male voice called through the door. "Mrs. Henderson? Are you there?" Martha's heart hammered. At 80, living alone and vulnerable, unexpected visitors were cause for alarm, not celebration. "Who is it?" she called back, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "It's Daniel Morrison from 3B. We've never officially met, but I've seen you in the hallway a few times. I hope this isn't weird, but I have something for you." Martha frowned, confusion replacing fear. She knew the building's residents, mostly by sight. The young couple, always arguing on the second floor, the elderly man who shuffled to check his mail each afternoon, the single mother with 3 loud children. But Daniel Morrison, the name meant nothing. Using her arms to shift her weight, Martha transferred herself into her wheelchair with practiced efficiency. It had taken months after the stroke to master this movement, months of frustration and tears and wanting to give up. She wheeled herself to the door, peered through the peephole, and saw a man in his mid-30s holding what appeared to be a cake. A small girl, maybe 6 or 7, stood beside him, clutching a handful of wilted dandelions. Martha's hand hesitated on the doorknob. Every news report she'd ever seen about scams targeting the elderly flashed through her mind. But something about the man's nervous expression, the way he kept glancing down at his daughter with encouraging nods, made her turn the lock. "Mrs. Henderson," Daniel said, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank you for opening the door. I know this is completely out of the blue. I'm Daniel, and this is my daughter Emma." The little girl thrust the dandelions forward. "Happy birthday," she announced proudly, her 2 front teeth missing. Martha stared at them, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally she managed, How could you possibly know it's my birthday?" Daniel had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was at the mailboxes this morning, and accidentally saw a birthday card that had been delivered to you. The envelope had fallen on the floor. I wasn't snooping, I promise. I picked it up to put it back in your box, and I saw it was a birthday card and that today's date was on it. Then I realized you're alone a lot, and I just thought—" He trailed off, shifting the cake in his hands. "This is probably super weird. I'm sorry. We can go." "No!" The word burst from Martha's lips before she could stop it. "No, please. I don't understand. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Emma piped up before her father could answer. "Because birthdays shouldn't be lonely. Daddy says nobody should be alone on their birthday." Something cracked open inside Martha's chest, and suddenly those tears she thought had dried up completely were threatening to fall again. Would you like to come in?" Daniel's relief was palpable. "We'd love to, if that's okay." Martha wheeled herself backward, allowing them to enter her humble apartment. She watched Daniel's eyes take in the space, the threadbare furniture, the ancient television, the walls bare except for a single photograph of her and Robert on their wedding day. If he judged her poverty, his face didn't show it. "I'm sorry it's not much," Martha found herself saying, hating the apologetic note in her voice. "It's perfect," Daniel said firmly, setting the cake on her kitchen table. It was a simple grocery store cake, with Happy 80th Birthday, written in blue icing. To Martha, it looked like the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Emma was already exploring, her bright eyes taking in everything. She stopped in front of the wedding photograph. "Is that you?" she asked, wonder in her voice. "A very long time ago," Martha confirmed, wheeling over to join her. "That's my husband, Robert. He passed away 6 years ago." "My mommy's gone too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She died when I was 4. I don't remember her much, but Daddy says she was the best person in the world." Martha's eyes flew to Daniel, who was staring at his shoes, jaw tight. The grief was still fresh on his face, still raw despite the years that must have passed. "I'm so sorry," Martha whispered. Daniel cleared his throat. "Anyway, we should probably let you get back to your day. We just wanted to—" "Stay," Martha interrupted, surprising herself with the force of the word. "Please stay. I have nothing else happening today, and it would be nice to have the company, unless you have other plans." Father and daughter exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, and then Emma was grinning. "Can we, Daddy, please? If Mrs. Henderson really doesn't mind," Daniel said slowly. "I don't mind. I'd be grateful." Martha's voice cracked on the last word. What happened next would remain one of the most surreal and beautiful afternoons of Martha's entire 80 years. Daniel cut the cake while Emma chattered away, telling Martha about her school, her best friend Mia, her teacher Mrs. Rodriguez, and how she was learning to read chapter books all by herself. Daniel made coffee in Martha's ancient percolator, and somehow the three of them ended up around her small table, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "These dandelions are beautiful," Martha said, arranging them in a glass of water. "Nobody's brought me flowers in years." "Daddy says dandelions aren't really weeds," Emma explained seriously. "He says they're wishes waiting to be made." Martha felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she'd thought had died with Robert, something that had withered further when Sarah stopped visiting. It took her a moment to recognize it, belonging. As they ate cake, Daniel told their story, how his wife, Melissa, had died from an aggressive cancer 3 years ago, how he'd been drowning in grief and single parenthood, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, barely keeping his head above water, how they'd moved to this apartment complex 6 months ago, because it was all he could afford after medical bills had bankrupted them. "I see you sometimes," Daniel admitted, "when I'm coming home late from my second shift at the warehouse. You're usually sitting by your window, and I always think I should say hello, but I never want to intrude. Emma and we understand what it's like to be lonely. We understand what it feels like when the world forgets you exist." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. "My daughter stopped calling," Martha found herself confessing. "She has her own life, her own problems. I understand, but it doesn't make it hurt less. I spent the first half of today wondering if anyone would even notice, if I just disappeared." "I'd notice," Emma said simply, reaching across the table to pat Martha's hand with sticky, cake-covered fingers. "You're our friend now." Something inside Martha shattered and reformed simultaneously. She began to cry, really cry, for the first time since her birthday had begun. But these weren't tears of loneliness or despair. These were tears of recognition, of connection, of being seen. Daniel handed her a napkin without judgment, his own eyes suspiciously bright. They stayed for 3 hours. Daniel helped Martha with small tasks around the apartment, changing a light bulb she couldn't reach, tightening the loose handle on her kitchen cabinet, moving a box that had been in her way for weeks. Emma showed Martha drawings from school and performed an elaborate dance, routine she'd learned in her after-school program. They looked through Martha's photo albums, and she told them stories about her youth, about Robert, about the daughter she still loved despite everything. When they finally had to leave, Emma had school the next day. Daniel paused at the door. "Mrs. Henderson, would it be okay if we visited again? Maybe we could have dinner together sometime. Emma and I aren't great cooks, but we make a decent spaghetti." Martha couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded vigorously. Emma hugged her goodbye, wrapping small arms around Martha's neck with unself-conscious affection. "I'm glad you're not alone anymore," she whispered. After they left, Martha sat in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their visit, the cake crumbs on the table, the wilted dandelions in their glass, the lingering warmth of human connection. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. Less oppressive, more peaceful. Her phone rang, startling her. Martha almost didn't answer. It was probably a telemarketer, but something made her pick up. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was small, guilty. "I'm sorry I didn't call earlier. I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. I know I've been terrible about staying in touch and I don't have any excuses, but I've been thinking about you. I miss you." Martha closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I miss you too, sweetheart." They talked for 20 minutes, really talked, in a way they hadn't in years. Sarah apologized. Martha forgave. They made plans for Sarah to visit next month. It wasn't a magical fix to their relationship, but it was a beginning. After hanging up, Martha wheeled herself to the window, where she'd sat so many lonely evenings watching the world go by. But tonight, she didn't feel separate from that world. She felt part of it again. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. "Mrs. Henderson, Emma and I were wondering if you'd like to join us for dinner this Friday. We're making spaghetti. Daniel and Emma, 3B." Martha held that note like it was made of gold. Sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places. Sometimes family isn't just about blood, but about who shows up, who sees you, who reminds you that your life still matters. That single dad who walked over didn't just give Martha a birthday cake. He gave her something infinitely more valuable. He gave her back her humanity, her connection, her reason to wake up the next morning. Martha's 80th birthday had started in devastating loneliness, but it ended with the knowledge that she wasn't invisible after all. In a world that often forgets its most vulnerable, Daniel Morrison had remembered, and in remembering, he had changed everything.